Tonight's speaker is a familiar face to many of us who are here tonight. Richard Hayden is someone known from coast to coast as someone whose career has taken him from New York City, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and back to New York City. And as of tonight at dinner, there were a few other stops in there as well, starting in Michigan. In other words, he has gone from films to tar pits to rail lines. You might be scratching your heads right now, but Richard has worked on a fascinating array of gardens over the years. Richard's career didn't start with horticulture, but in the commercial film business, working as a production manager for ARC Films. He must have been bitten by the horticulture bug because he did a 180-degree turn and started his own landscape business in Los Angeles that he ran from 1992 to 2012. From there, Richard began his public career as the head gardener for the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles and later assistant deputy director, where he managed the natural gardens that serves as a living laboratory for the study and educational promotion of biodiversity in urban LA. While serving at the History Museum, another project found him overseeing the planting and maintenance of the gardens at the La Brea tar pits, where he also taught classes and led tours relating to habitat gardening and horticultural management, including soil health, composting, and organic pest management, skills that he would certainly find useful in his current position. From Los Angeles, Richard moved to the Bay Area, where he became the garden director for the Elizabeth F. Campbell Garden, which is where many of you know him from. And our own Carrie Parker, where's Carrie? Roped him into, she immediately noticed that we got to get him in Western Hort. So she got him to join Western Hort and convinced him to join the Western Hort board. We know a good thing when we see one. Richard was instrumental in arranging fascinating speakers and helped with the organizational parts of running this group. But New York was calling. And in 2020, Richard took on the position of Senior Director of Horticulture at the High Line in New York City, where he oversees all aspects of the design, care, and horticultural practices for its world-renowned gardens. The High Line is a garden created from an elevated rail line that runs through New York City. I read that the High Line soil depths are on average only 18 inches deep, which he confirmed at dinner. Managing a garden with full-grown trees and shrubs in a soil layer so shallow is a feat in and of itself. Richard's skills from previous positions certainly gives him the knowledge to care for this special garden. Many of you saw the movie 5 Seasons, The Gardeners of Piet Oudolf, we presented in May of 2024. The High Line is one of Piet's projects, and Richard has had the privilege to work with him personally. I look forward to hearing all about the collaboration with Piet Oudolf and what must be a challenging yet satisfying job to keep the High Line as vibrant and full of life as it is. With that, please welcome Richard Hayden.
Thank you. I think that introduction was actually enough. I'm just going to sit down now. Thank you, Leslie. So great to see so many of you. And I just have to say, my time in the Bay Area was really made by all of the friends I made here at Western Hort. And it's just such a treat to be back amongst you. Even if I don't remember your name, I don't remember what I had for breakfast. So I remember your face, though, and I remember the warm feelings that I had from seeing all of you and being up here. However, I did find the Bay Area very chilly coming from Los Angeles. You don't use heat up here. I never understood that. You all just wear those little puffy coats all winter, and you know, you're very solid stock. Okay. Gosh. Let's talk a little bit about the High Line. So we're going to do just a little tour. We're going to talk a little bit about the High Line history, a little bit about the design story, and yes, working with Piet Oudolf has been an amazing thing. A little bit about the way we take care of the High Line, because it's kind of a unique naturalistic garden, and we like to say we've gotten away from using the word maintenance, and now we're kind of using land care. We were using stewardship for a while, but you know, There's a whole thing about the way we talk about language and horticulture, and that's a whole nother talk, and we'll save that one for later. And then a little bit about the programming and some of the ecological benefits of the High Line, and then back again to my friend Pete. So without further ado, let's do some history. So the High Line kind of got its start because in New York City, from about 1860 to 1930, the trains coming in with raw materials and taking out goods would run right down the middle of 10th Avenue, to the point where 10th Avenue became known as Death Avenue. Over 400 people lost their lives during the course of the trains. And they would have this, I'm going to back up. You can see, oh, see, I am going to use the pointer. One of their strategies was to have the West Side Cowboys actually ride in front of the trains, trying to get people to get out of the way. It didn't work, evidently. So in 1934, in the middle of the Depression, it became such an important factor that they built this amazing piece of infrastructure, 30 feet in the air, two very heavy freight trains running side by side for 2.5 miles in the west side of Manhattan, from about 34th Street down to Spring Street. And that was great, you know, and it did actually run through buildings, as you're seeing here. And that worked very well for many years. You can see kind of the story of the High Line. That's the Hudson River up on top. So some of the goods might even be coming in there, and then of course transferred to the High Line. And then, you know, they built some freeways, and trucks got very popular. And so the High Line was really no longer used. And so the last train on the High Line ran in 1980. It was a box load of frozen turkeys at Thanksgiving. And then for 20 years, it was basically vacant. And we know that nature abhors a vacuum. And so a garden was created. It just sprung up. The birds deposited a few things. The railroad ties disintegrated and made some soil. It was basically, you know, ballast rock gravel, which is what they have around railroads, but enough soil and things kind of got in there and decomposed. And so you had this beautiful ribbon of green running through the west side of Manhattan. And I could be honest with you, I lived in a block and a half away when I first moved to New York in the early 80s, and had no idea this was there. You just didn't know. And so those that did know, some of the community folks, were really interested in maintaining. And there was some thought during the Giuliani administration. They ripped down the southernmost mile of the High Line, and he wanted to rip down the rest. And they had some meetings around the community to decide what the High Line could become. And these two gentlemen, Josh David and Robbie Hammond, met. They had snuck up on the High Line and knew how special it was, and decided to form Friends of the High Line in 1999. And they were really smart because they hired this art photographer. Oh, I don't have that slide. They hired Joel Sternfeld to make these incredibly evocative photographs over the course of a year. And they would this is before digital age, they would blow them up, put them on easels, take them to these community meetings, and really get people excited about what the possibilities of creating a garden up here might be. So they had a design competition. I can't remember, like almost 1,000 submissions. Like, you could do anything you want, and 1,000 people from around the globe made some suggestions. This was my favorite. I think a 1.5 mile long lap pool would have been a lot of fun. One of them was to turn it into a roller coaster. Fanciful, but not necessarily practical. They made a decision to actually do a serious design competition for firms, for groups, actually made presentations, and they selected James Corner Field Operations, who were working with a relatively unknown architecture firm called Diller, Scofidio and Renfro. And then they hired this Dutch nurseryman named Piet Oudolf to do the planting design. And so here's one of the renderings from the original plan that they submitted. And remember this, I'm going to show you what it looks like today. And it's amazing how much these renderings they did look exactly like what they built. It's really, truly remarkable. Here they are doing a site visit, and I love, I can do this. There's James Corner in his suit and briefcase. I'm sure it was a dangerous place to be. All sorts of different things might have been lurking in the grass. But they were using this idea of the self-seeded landscape as their kind of jumping off place for what the highline might be able to become. Here's Jim doing some serious thinking. If you'll notice, that's a sumac behind him, a rus, I think that's typhina. And that becomes a factor of something that they decided to use on the highline. You'll see that in a few minutes. You'll see some Phragmites growing as well. But they did a survey of the plants at this point. There were 501 species, and more than half of them were natives. A lot of goldenrods, as you might suspect. But, and this was kind of their design ethos, if you will. The idea that they wanted to keep it simple, keep it wild, keep it quiet, and then keep it slow. I don't think keep it crowded was on their list, but that's a little bit of what it's become. But we have our strategies for managing that. And then here's Piet. This is the first section that they were planting back in 2000 and probably 2008. Because the soil was contaminated, there was lead paint, there was asbestos from the brakes of the old trains, heavy metals, everything had to be removed. The lead paint had to be remediated. All of the railings had lead paint. So they had to remove everything. They numbered the rails that you see there and then put those back once they poured an 18-inch deep, kind of, if you will, a very shallow swimming pool, and put everything back with 18 inches of soil and storm drains that are actually located within the plant beds. So you'll see in a few minutes where the walkway is actually permeable and the rain comes through and has to move through the soil before it can move to the downspout. We would love to be capturing that, but the real estate that it would take to actually put in the tanks to reuse that water is worth more than the water itself. So Piet got busy. He'd done a few gardens. He'd done the Lurie Garden in Chicago and the Battery Park Garden, but he was not super well known. But he really knows his plants because he grew them and sold them and used them for so many years. And as you may know, a lot of our prairie plants went to Europe and became very popular there in the 50s and 60s before we were really using them here. So there were lots of selections of a lot of our native prairie plants there. So this is Piet's garden in Humelo, the Netherlands. Very naturalistic, very evocative, very dynamic. Things are always moving around. In fact, I'll tell you that I spoke to him last year and they'd had floods. This garden that you see on the right was actually underwater for the better part of a month and a half. And the interesting thing is you see the Joe Pye weeds here. And those, of course, if you know where those grow in the East, they grow in ditches and in low spots. They were the ones that didn't make it. And some of the plants that did were the ones he didn't really suspect. And so he's always just adding something new or coming up with something fresh. It's really an amazing place. And of course, the kind of, I know I love this quote. I asked Piet about this. This is from the New York Times. I said, really, did you say a plant is only worth growing if it looks good when it's dead? And he said, well, yeah, but what I meant was when it's decaying. I didn't mean dead. But of course, it's a better quote. So, but it's really true. Like the Highland really introduced this idea of the four-season garden, as you know, if you've seen the film, right? That these dried grasses and seeds, as he calls them, seed skeletons, can be up and be really looking good. The formatting's a little strange on that slide, but anyway, but you get the idea. And it really introduced the idea that you could have this garden, it can be evocative in the winter, and it can also serve to feed the birds and to create spaces for wildlife to hide and to overwinter. And we really like that part of it. So you get a sense of it here. This is a section of the Highline that's called the Northern Spur Preserve. You can see where the railroad cars used to go straight into this building. It was a refrigerator building originally. Now rumor has it the NSA is there, so we don't know what goes on, but this is one of Piet's favorite sections. It's this kind of homage to the original self-seeded landscape. But we do have a beautiful spring bulb display, wonderful kind of changing seasons and different things that take center stage as we go through the seasons. And Piet was really interested in creating he likes to say that gardens are meant to create an emotional experience. And that's really what he's looking for. And he doesn't recreate nature. He creates a garden that is an homage to nature. And he wanted, because the High Line's 1.5 miles long, you certainly want something interesting. And so this idea of having this episodic journey that you're going, literally on a journey that's going to give you a different experience as you walk. And it's interesting, as they were thinking about a framework for how to create the gardens, they landed on this idea of ecological habitats. And so like we have woodlands and we have shrub thickets or woodland edge, and we have one wetland bed, and then also many different kinds of grasslands. And so by taking your cues from what the High Line felt like at the time, if it's wide open, let's do a grassland. If it's more contained, we do a woodland. They created this structure to kind of make the garden interesting. Here they are, we're planting the first section down at this is the Gansevoort Woodlands, just north of where our headquarters is. I can't remember the exact number of plants for the first 3 phases, but something like 300,000 or something. It's a lot of plants. Of course, he plants very densely. He plants to keep the weeds down. And this is the Gansevoort Woodland. We're going to take a little tour through some of the habitats and kind of work our way north. We call this the front porch of the High Line. It's right outside our headquarters, which is at Gansevoort and Washington Streets next to the Whitney Museum. These are gray birches, a plant native to New York City, by the way. And red buds. The interesting thing about the High Line, and it's the complexity of the garden, I think, that makes it also one of the unique things, is you have this incredible woodland overhead, right? You get that overarching cathedral of birches over the walkway, but you also get the spring flowering shrubs, the red buds, there's dogwoods, there's amelanchiers here, Juneberry. And then you also have this incredibly rich ground cover layer. In this case, the Virginia bluebells. Sisleyria autumnalis is probably the most numerous plant on the High Line. It's just such a great low grass, 4-season interest. And then a series of ferns, and I think there's also a woodland aster in here as well. And then you get a sense of what it looks like through the seasons. This is probably early winter. You can see our headquarter building is right there. And it looks great in the snow. It's really magical in the snow. Because we are a bridge, we have to worry about ice forming on the walkway. So it's unusual to see people walking on the snow. We sometimes have to close and then remove the snow before we let people walk. But it's really evocative. Don't tell anyone, but I'm going to be the first person to actually cross-country ski down the High Line. I'm waiting for the next good storm, and I'm going to get out at 6 a.m. and just make it happen, and because I think that would be amazing. And then you get to see a little bit here of like the complexity of the woodland. This is Stakey's humolo, actually. This is common names I'm really bad at. Dead nettle, I think, is maybe this common name. But everybody assumes that this is from Piet's hometown of Humelo, Netherlands. It was named after where he's from. And I asked him about it, and he said, no. I got that plant from Germany. The word for bumblebee in German is Hummel. So it comes from the fact that it is just a great bumblebee plant and looks great in the winter too. So there's that picture of what it looks like now. And if you remember from the rendering, it's very similar, right? It has that evocative, and they created this really beautiful, slow stairway. So you get to really experience like the way the beams are constructed, and you really see like the structure of this amazing piece of infrastructure. Oh, thank you. Good question. What's hanging off the sides? It's primarily climbing hydrangea, and I can't even remember the genus on that. this is the one where I do know the common name. Also, our native wisteria is growing there as well. And I got a note recently from Pete. Because these are so high, it's hard for my staff to do this. And so we hired the tree trimmers to come in with the bucket truck. And last summer they had trimmed these, if I can get it to work, they had trimmed these all straight right across. And so the note I got a picture from Pete and with a note saying, Richard, I think we need to do so we now are very careful about getting the team to do a staggered cutting so it looks a little bit more natural. But the problem is that there's we have a restaurant right here that's part of our venue, an income producer, and you can't hide their sign. So we have to do a lot of trimming. So here's an early picture of the Washington grasslands, which is the next section you get to from the woodlands. And you can see that it's a matrix of a series of grasses and perennials, but a cotinus named Grace is in this section as well. And then what happens is that shortly after that, the grasses kind of really take off and do a little bit of an overachieving look. And then it's not too much later that the perennials then start to choke out the grasses. And a lot of what we do is we maintain plants from swallowing each other. If you want to be a successful plant in 18 inches of soil growing 30 feet in the air with winds and reflected scorch and everything, you have to be what we now refer to as opportunistic. So the calamintha, the wild petunia, the Ruellia, all of them are opportunistic, and we are consistently trying to make sure that they don't get too happy and everything stays in balance. A little overview, you can see the ribbon sense of the high line. And it's funny, these smoke bushes have seeded around a little bit, and we have a few volunteers and a few that have declined. And so we're leaving the volunteers because they've chosen to be there. They're just gonna hopefully be a happier plant. And so that's one of the dynamic aspects of the way we do, is that often if things are reseeded in a certain fashion, we'll kind of honor that because they're choosing to be there. But with a lot of perennials, 16 years on now, we're finding that we're constantly having to replace things as well. And then you can see the full-on summer prairie look in this garden. It's really quite spectacular. I think this is an echinacea that Pete introduced called Vintage Wine. And it has slightly shorter petals, but a much more seed head that is much more architectural. And so he loves this for the way it looks right now, but also the way it looks all winter. It's got a really nice structure to it. And then you can see the fall here. This is an iconic peat plant. This is Amsonia, the kind of gold copper. Bronze one is Amsonia hubrechtii, or threadleaf blue star, only known to be native to a small population in Arkansas and Missouri, I think. It's a floodplain plant, has an amazing ferny texture, blue flowers in the spring, and then it does this in the fall and has this nice, and you can see the echinacea here doing its thing, its kind of structural seed skeleton. After that garden, heading north, you get to this beautiful thing called the Woodland Edge. This is one of my favorite gardens. This is north of the Standard Hotel, which you can kind of see here is straddling the park. And this is all about texture. It's foliage, texture, it's ferns and grasses. And he does this wonderful thing where there's just these giant drifts kind of going back and forth, and it almost feels like the garden was there and we just put the walkway down. And you can see here there's very little flower going on, but it's just really a spectacular symphony of texture. And shrubs. This is our native Prunus virginiana, which does not normally grow as a single plant. It wants to be a giant thicket, and so we're constantly having to, every spring, many volunteers are out there cutting back all of those sprouts. Further north, we get to what we call the Diller von Furstenberg sun deck. Barry Diller and Dion von Furstenberg were big supporters of ours initially. And you can see how quiet everything looks here and how small everything is. And if you'll notice, right here are a couple of sumacs, and they decided that it was such a cool plant and so textural and not the kind of plant that you would normally see growing ornamentally, because if you've been to the East Coast, you know it's that thing that grows along the side of the freeway. But they use it to quite a great effect here on the High Line. And then the bed that's right over here, we're going to see more of in a second, the little skinny bed, is our wetland bed. And the idea was that you're going to see a series of native wetland plants, but be able to look out and squint your eyes, because that's the Hudson River, and pretend that these plants might have been growing along the edge of the Hudson. So here we are a few years later. You can see we have a little water feature that just sheets across the walkway. It's like a swimming pool. It's treated, but it's if you're a New York tourist and you have hot feet, it's a delicious thing in the summertime to take your shoes off and walk through. You can see here, this is the wetland bed on the right-hand side. It did have some typha, which kind of took over, and it also had another plant when I started 3.5 years ago, horsetail, equisetum. And so the entire bed was equisetum. And so after 15 years of a boggy condition, we decided last year, when we finally put irrigation in this bed, it was one of the 3 beds when I started that had no irrigation, which made no sense. So last spring we did irrigation and we replanted, completely redoing the soil, left out the equisetum, left out the typha, and now we've got, you know, these beautiful plants growing, and it's just really looking spectacular. And then you can see what the sumac does, right? It's gotten really tall in some of these spots. How old does a sumac get? 15, 20? We're finding that some of the bigger ones are actually getting some fungal issues. And so we're having to just chop them down and trying to figure out what we're going to do as the bed here just becomes literally a knitting of sumac rhizomes, if you will. But really incredible fall color. And, you know, kind of sculptural, as you can see here. This one is Rus typhina lanceolata. And what we're doing this year, when we're cutting down those large ones, we're just letting everything sprout. And so it's really kind of fun. It's like a whole different kind of texture that we're getting. And if you've seen sumac, you know that it has a beautiful kind of pink stem to it, a beautiful kind of ruby red seed pod. And those look really great all winter. So we'll be selecting out a few of these, but it's just kind of one of the ways we're kind of dynamically managing this section. And then further north is the 10th Avenue Square. This is a kind of a shrub thicket, kind of a little bit of a prairie plant. This is purple milkweed. We have 6 different milkweeds on the High Line. We love our monarchs. Yay. And of course, I'll show you in a minute, just some of the ways that this garden matures. On the left, it's probably July, and then we get into October, and you can see the seed heads on the eutrochium, or the Joe Pye weed. Oh, no, there's a slide missing. Oh, there it is. Purple milkweed. Beautiful, a little bit rare in New York, but it turns into these beautiful seed pods. And this is kind of Piet's brilliance. You can see how the seed pods start to have this purpley bronze color to them. And it's a perfect color echo with the fading Joe Pye weed and the echinacea. And those are some sexy seed pods, aren't they? And they look great all winter. This is the Northern Spur Preserve that you saw earlier. This has northern sea oats, Chasmanthium, which left to its own devices would completely swallow this garden. So we're constantly weeding out that. And you can see how this is Gelinia, the kind of red leaf Bowman's root, I think is the common name on that. So there was this section of the park, this used to be part of the Chelsea grasslands, where we actually have 30-foot tall bur oak trees growing. We have 4 of these guys. And there was a lot of construction in this area, you'll see in a second. And so when I started, the garden looked like this on the left. And this was after a recent replanting from all the construction. And so obviously it was too shady to support the grassland, the oak savanna. So with Piet's help, we've been transitioning to a woodland garden in this area. And there you can see the oaks. And the two buildings that were built in 2021, creating a canyon where there used to be wide open views of the Hudson. We euphemistically refer to that as responding to a changing city. It's development. But, you know, the Highland was always funded with the idea that it would regenerate and kind of renovate the neighborhood. I think we just overjuiced that idea a little bit. And the exciting thing is that these oaks, while this building was being constructed, the first one on the left, this is called One High Line. It's a luxury hotel and condominiums that have just opened just a couple of weeks ago, actually. But they put up a construction shed over the walkway to protect people from falling construction debris. And the building went bankrupt during COVID, so this construction project took 9 years. And there was a construction shed over this section. And when that happens, we can't work in the beds because it's an unsafe zone. So during that time, these oaks sprouted, and we were like, well, that's very cool. So we're going to now extend our oak grove. This is the newest section of the High Line. And this area is going to be replanted. You'll see a little bit more of it. The underplantings will actually get all redone. So further north, the Chelsea Grassland is probably one of the more iconic sections of the High Line. It's that kind of based on a tall grass prairie, has a really interesting kind of evocative way it evolves over the course of a year. You can see as we get into summer how it kind of changes. A lot of natives, but a few non-natives, like this little Naudia, this kind of burgundy colored plant. And Piet very much wants to say that he's in favor of plants and that gardens are for people. And so he's happy to use natives, but he's also happy to include plants that bloom at a time when he can't find a native, as long as it's well behaved. And for the most part, they are. We'll get to a couple of situations where they're not. And then I just took this picture, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. And we're constantly having to, some things will get too happy. The Amsonia got too happy and we had to trim that back. The Vernonia, this purple New York ironweed, got too happy. So it's a lot of editing that we do and a lot of replanting of things that are just failing after a while. But you can see the buildings, right? All of the buildings you're seeing here were new since the High Line opened 15 years ago. And you can see the oaks down there at the end. In the fall, great color. We even, our neighbors are choosing some plants that kind of match. You can see one of our big American hollies there. And then in the wintertime, we get this beautiful view. And then if you go a little further north, we're back in another shrub thicket or woodland. This is a really complex garden called the Chelsea thicket. And turning really almost into a woodland. We have our native juniper, our red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. Oops. And because it's so thick, it requires extra care. We're constantly trimming, removing trees, trying to make sure that we have enough light on the understory so that we keep that complexity, that we keep the flowering shrub and the ground covers happy. And when you have railroad ties and you have tree roots and you have drip tubing running between the two, as the tree root grows, we'll suddenly have a section that's just not getting irrigation. So we're trying to manage how we're going to deal with that. Like, how do you come in and actually find where the pinch is? And drip tubing after 16 years, do the emitters get clogged and do we have to replace those? And stay tuned, we're going to figure that out in March. But it's one of the things that we constantly have to kind of plan for as we enter what we euphemistically call our teenage years in the High Line. So there is a lawn on the High Line. You can see it does get used. I mean, there's not a lot of places to really lay out and relax on the High Line, so it's a nice thing to have. But it kind of had a hiccup back in when I started in 2022 during COVID. There was no maintenance on the High Line for 4 months, from March to July. There was no cutback that year, no weeding. It's amazing how out of control a garden can get in 4 months. So when I started, the lawn had grown long, and they thought it looked so romantic because the grass was so wavy and long. But if you know anything about turf grass, the roots die when they don't get a certain amount of light, and it became a patchy, weedy mess. And so they ripped it out, not very well, kind of scalped it, threw in some prairie seeds, and then that was fall of 21. And then I arrived to hopefully get some things going and see what this prairie was going to become. And of course, it looked great when the Rudbeckia was blooming, but there were so many weeds involved. You can kind of get a sense of it here. That's an American smoke bush, by the way, smoke tree, Cotinus obavatus. And you can see down the Nyssa sylvatica growing in the park strip at Gamble Garden, which is where I first learned this plant. But anyway, you can see kind of the look of this. There was mugwort, there was all sorts of things. And Piet came in for his first visit in June of 22. I was there all of 7 weeks, I think. Didn't even know the names of most of the plants. And I said, Piet, I'm so sorry. Everybody thinks that you designed everything on the High Line, and I don't want them to associate your name with this, because it really just didn't look very good. So we tried for a couple of years to kind of get it to work, and he said, oh, you're going to have to mow that. You're going to have to just get on top of the annual weeds by mowing every couple of weeks, which is one of the strategies for establishing meadows. But honestly, after a while, we just decided it was going to be better to return it to a lawn. Plus, it was a spot for people. The gardens are for people. And when you've seen the preschools come and have story time on the lawn, you're reminded really what it's for. So we, to great expense, because everything on the High Line logistically is so difficult, we're there at 4 a.m. with a crane, and all the soil and the compost and the sod is coming up, but it was worth the effort. Because I asked Piet about it from a design aspect, and he said, and if you've been to some of his other gardens, you might know that he uses areas of turf as kind of a visual rest. So for him, as you're coming through this really kind of complex garden and you get to the lawn, and it does a little kind of swoop up at the end, it has a little shape to it. For him, it's kind of, I call it the sorbet course of the High Line. It's just this little green moment of visual rest and actual rest. And then heading north, we get to this area called the Meadow Walk. And this was an interesting garden. This really had some issues during COVID, kind of a grassland garden, but you can see this garden, it's called Korean feathergrass, Pelamogrostis brachytricha, which is the seed head right here on the right-hand side. It, during the course of that 4 months, got such a foothold in the garden. It was supposed to be about 20% of this garden, and it ended up being about 90%. So it has been a real struggle to kind of get that back. And I've since learned that the Lurie Garden has taken out all of their Calamagrostis brachytricha, and the Chicago Botanic Garden has placed it on the invasive list. So we're struggling now. We don't really feel like there's any place for it to escape to in New York City. I have not seen it. Well, there are no empty lots. What am I saying? But we don't want to make it okay to have this grass, so we're probably going to be replacing it. But it is, it's beautiful. But here you can see a little bit more of a restoration that's happened. There's other grasses and other perennials that are now kind of taking a forefront in this garden. You can see here I think that's Rudbeckia subtomentosa, and a couple different sedums. The blackberry lily, which is Iris something domestica. And then we get to the flyover, and this is the canopy walk. This was an area in the garden, the two buildings that you see on the left-hand side that kind of create the canyon were old buildings. And so there was always a bit of a canyon here. And so when the original High Line was kind of surveyed, this is where Tree of Heaven, ailanthus, and also the sumacs were growing. So the idea was, well, let's turn this into a woodland and we'll make a canopy walk. And Piet came in October of last year, and these magnolias and sassafras and what else is in here? 3 different kinds of magnolias, frankly, and the sassafras are 30 feet tall now. And he was just amazed that they were able to get the soil here does mound up in sections, so it's not 18 inches, it's maybe 30 inches in some spots. But it also has this amazing kind of tapestry of ground covers that you can look down on from the canopy walk. And keeping everything happy here and enough light, the tree trimmers are coming frequently and they're really talented. And of course the sassafras, if you don't know this tree, has an amazing fall color. It does orange, it does burgundy, does yellow, and looks great with the snow. And then we get to the wildflower field. This is between 26th and 20th and 30th Streets. Also a different kind of grassland. This is a garden that looks really good in the fall. Right now, the goldenrod is just taking off. This is Solidago speciosa. There's a lot of asters, Symphyotrichum up here, and a lot of opportunistic plants. There's a coreopsis that you see blooming on the left that, left to its own devices, would swallow New York. And then we get to this area of the crossroads, and excuse the quality of this slide. I grabbed this off of Google, off the Google, as my mother would say. It's just to show the garden was installed, I think, in 2017, and it was kind of wide open. And then this happened. Same view. That's Hudson Yards up there, which is I think one of those buildings is like the 3rd tallest in the country right now. And then that little dimpled thing you're seeing is an area called the Shed, which is a performance space or art space, or it all moves back and becomes a courtyard as well. And when Piet came to visit in June of 22, for his first time in 5 years at the High Line, we were walking up and he saw all of this and he's like, wow, this, there were like 7 35-story buildings that he just weren't there before. And so now we're turning around and looking back the other way. He said, why don't we put some trees in here? Why don't we, because there's a bench that could use some shade. And if you had some trees, it would settle you down, make you feel like you're back on the High Line, and take the looming nature of the buildings away. And so with his help, we came up with a little plan. These are going to be installing next month, I'm excited to say. And the new one that we're adding is this tree called Austraea, which is American hop hornbeam, which is a native. And he's very particular. Of course, all we can find are trees that are grown for street trees, right? So they've got 5 or 6 feet of clearance. And he's like, no, we can't have lollipops. So we're buying multiple trees, and we're buying them small enough that we're going to be able to take some of the root ball away, cram them together in the same hole, and pretend that they're multis. So next time you come, we'll see what they look like. But it's a tall order. You'd think just planting a tree could be an easy thing, but there's a system to everything to get this kind of naturalistic look that he's interested in. So at 30th Street, if you head west, if you head east, you come to this area we call the Tilt. It's landscape architecture, wishful thinking. There's quite a slope on that garden. I'm not showing you how ugly it looks. I've tried multiple on the backside of this to get things established. Stay tuned. We're working on something, a strategy this fall. But it's a woodland, 3 feet of soil here, and actually it's hiding some storage that we have and some restrooms that we have in this building here. And then the other thing that we have on the High Line that we don't talk about much, but there is a full-on art program. And this area has what we call the plinth, which is about kind of a plinth plaza in the very center. So shortly after I started, they installed a big tree on the left, which was kind of stunning, 25 feet tall. You could see it from 30 blocks away. And the nice thing about this particular piece is that a tree is something that we can talk about in horticulture, that's something they can talk about in art, and we have that synergy of programming. After that came the big pigeon. We were doing an urban ecology focus, and so I kind of was trying to make a statement about birds and pigeons. I think it landed. There's a new one coming next April. I can't tell you what it is. They would kill me. But it has nothing to do with gardens. Yeah, it's big. Then we won't talk about what happens when they plop other sculptures down in the rest of the garden, because this is a nice talk. This is the latest section of the Highline that's open. It's called the Moynihan Connector. It's brand new construction, and it's literally designed to connect the Highline. If you see at the down, I didn't know I was going to be using this pointer so much. And for those of you watching on Zoom, I'm talking about that little timber bridge at the very end of this picture on the right that makes a left turn and connects you basically through a building over to the Moynihan train station, which is next door to Penn Station. So you can take your train into Penn Station, walk across 9th Avenue, and use your roller bag all the way down to the West Village now. So it's really kind of, in fact, it's something I do often to commute. I live on the Upper West Side. I take the train to Penn Station, and I walk my way down the High Line. It's kind of fabulous. But this is based on a northeast woodland. Because there's 4 feet of soil here, because it's brand new construction, we have things like red maples and other things that you wouldn't see in shallower soils. True confession, Pete did not design this. This was all set up before I came along, and they had someone from James Corner Field Operations did the landscape design, which is kind of unfortunate because it's hard to say that Pete designed everything on the High Line. And we're making a few changes to kind of make it fit. And the other thing that you'll notice, this is also on the Moynihan Connector. You know, are there any landscape architects here? Yeah. Do you plant like this? They plant, okay, shut your ears, landscape architects. It always seems like they plant for 6 months. We're going to get our pictures 6 months from now, and then however you need to take care of it is how you're going to take care of it. I mean, we're a year and a half on, and I just don't know, what am I supposed to do with that juniper? It's a giant root ball. I can't really move it. I can't, so anyway, we have editing to do, but it's just one more thing that we kind of have to deal with is how do we get everything to kind of feel like it fits and it doesn't swallow its neighbor. If we head west at 30th Street on the High Line, you get to this area called the Eastern Rail Track. They had this lovely idea that they were going to scoop the walkway down and make it feel like you're in the railroad tracks, which is great, except now we're dealing with 12 inches of soil. And because they've built buildings on both sides now, this is an early picture on the left, it is a wind tunnel, and we often have to close this section because the wind is so high. We've had actual windows from these buildings pop out and fall on the High Line, and boy, would that ruin your day. You'll notice something else about this section is they designed this after the first section and the second section were installed, and they had originally planned that we get something about 300,000 visitors is what they thought. And the first year it was 1.5 million. But phase 2 was already in the design and installation, so they couldn't make changes. Phase 3 had yet to be designed, and so now we have generous walkways, which means we have tiny little plant beds, and it's even harder to get things established because there's just not a lot of soil going on. Let me just grab a drink here. And this is the second tree that they put in here. I think the first one were Kentucky coffee trees, and I can't remember the genus. And then these are Gladitsia, one of our native tough trees. And they seem to be doing okay. They're growing in just big platforms, or big containers. The 11th Avenue Bridge, this is a section that gets a lot of wind, trying to get it established. You can see the buildings are really looming here. There is a little section for kids that we call the beams. They kind of cut things down and rubberized all these beams, and they kind of move, and there's little tunnels, and it's a nice little section for our smaller folks. And then all the way over on the west side, this is the very northwest section of the park, is what we call the Western Rail Yards. And this area has not been remediated, so the soil is still contaminated. They've just done some sort of a paint over of the lead paint to contain it, but we really don't dig the soil up here because it's got heavy metals and other things. And so they decided to claim it and put this, what they called interim walkway in back in 2018. It was an asphalt aggregate mix, and it was so interim that it's completely disintegrated. And so now here we are in 2024, and the decision was made to replace this walkway. So this is going to happen this winter. They'll put in something a little bit more. But the interesting thing that happened is because the rain that fell on the walkway suddenly sheets off to the side, the area right along the walkway was getting twice as much water, and we suddenly had trees growing. We have all sorts of crab apples, Bradford pears, some native poplars, but we also have this beautiful schizocarium grass. So we're trying to do some editing. We just kind of cut things down, and there's some Oriental bittersweet that's gotten established up here, which is a real invasive, and it's just a constant editing. But I think having the dichotomy of what was self-seeded, and then when you see the more cultivated design landscape, it gives you a nice thing to kind of compare. Great views of the Hudson up here. Interesting furniture. So how do we curate the dynamic landscape? Really, with 6.5 million visitors, I'm surprised that we don't have more plant damage. I was saying to somebody earlier today, it's like truly a miracle that people stay on the path for the most part. Of course, if you ask my staff, they would tell you that it's just horrific and some little plant got stepped on, and I tell them that's actually the definition of a public garden. As my friend Carol used to say, foot blight. So yeah, one of the biggest compliments we get is, oh, it's so naturalistic, it just must grow this way, right? And no, actually, we are out there doing a lot of work. We are completely organic. I should say that the Highline is a New York City park. That was one of the arrangements to kind of get the whole project going, is that the parks would own the Highline, but the entire budget, the entire operation is managed, and the fundraising is done by the Conservancy Friends of the Highline. The only thing we really get from the Parks Department are regulations. And that means that, there's a really big advancement team at the Highline raising almost $20 million annually. And that's from public, because we're free to the public. We don't have an admission fee. So it's really, we have a membership program, we have donors, we have corporate sponsors, foundations, et cetera. And we really, they do an amazing job of kind of shaking the bushes and keeping things funded. And that was a little easier when we were, cute and young, but we're in our teenage years now. So we're constantly kind of always looking for opportunities. I love these 3 slides. This is when I started in the summer of 22, everything had really gotten overgrown. The tree trimmers hadn't been in for a few years because of COVID. And, it kept me up at night when I first started, because I was like, there's these 30-foot tall trees on the Highline, and it's so windy, and we get hurricanes. And, every time the wind would blow, I would be up all night. And then I did some hiking in Northwest Connecticut on the Appalachian Trail, and there had been a storm, and these giant trees had blown over. And lo and behold, they were growing, because of all the ledge rock, in 18 inches of soil. And so I was like, well, Mother Nature's figured this out. It's not that unusual to have an entire ecosystem or forest or planting growing in 18 inches of soil. So I relaxed a little bit. Plus, birches are really malleable, nimble, resilient. So we had the tree shapers come in. I don't know how they do this. They spend so much time looking up, my neck would hurt. But they really, you can see the delicate work they're doing here. And then the next spring, it looked like this. So now we have them on an every 2 year. They spent in 2022, they spent 13 days. That was about $85,000 worth of tree trimming. And now now that we've got things under control, it's a little less, but it's just one of the things we have to do to keep everything kind of happy. The other thing we do is this thing called Chelsea chopping, which is basically cutting back perennials. It keeps them, things would be so floppy, really, given their own devices. A lot of our, excuse me, asters, the Vernonias, the Coreopsis, some Monardas, et cetera, they get a chop. And some of the asters get chopped 3 times, June, July, and August. And they bloom in October, but they also don't flop, you know. The other strategy we do is we have a tendency to companion plant. So if it's a super floppy perennial, it gets planted next to some rigid grasses, and hopefully the two can work it out in that sense. And yeah, and as I mentioned, just the development, it can be a challenge, the responding to a changing city. And it also, one of the factors we deal with is that there are times of the year when there will be just the right amount of reflected light off of one of these buildings, and suddenly all your heuchera leaves are scorched. And you come in one day and you're like, whoa. So that's the other thing that we're kind of managing to some extent. Not to mention, you can walk down the High Line, and on certain days you can just feel the heat radiating from some of those reflections. And we do install about 6,000 new plants every year. This is John Gunderson. He is the longest serving horticulturalist, senior horticulture supervisor. He's been at the High Line for 14 years. He's the keeper of the Piet vision, I call him. He's part of our admin team, and we make all of the kind of approve all of the planting decisions that need to get made. But he's planting in the Gansevoort woodland, and it's so full of roots that really getting a flat of perennials in is quite a feat. And of course, logistically, this is early in the morning. It's easy to move a cart full of plants up the High Line. But as it gets further into the day and the pathways are so packed, you can see that's only about 8 feet wide. And when you have all that humanity passing by later in the day, it gets really challenging. We do cut back in March. And because we have so much going on, there's usually shrubs and there's also rail ties in the beds. We do it all by hand. I think at the Lurie Garden, they get out the mulching mower, and I'm really jealous. But we take about 250 volunteers over the course of March and get in and do all of this work by hand. And we also do snow. People say, what does your team do? I have a team of, there's 16 of us total, 11 horticulturalists, each have a zone on the High Line that they maintain. We have 3 seasonals in the summertime. And then we have Yuki, who's our manager. But I've shoveled snow on the High Line. We also do a lot of winter planning for programs. We do data work. We keep pretty busy. We keep a list all summer of things that we're going to do in the winter. And by the time we get to December, it's like, how are we going to get this all done? That just gives you a little bit of the sense of the team that we're working with. And the interesting thing, the team is actually divided into teams, and this is really helpful to us, but some are actually certified arborists, and so they're more interested in tree care, soil. We have a new propagation facility that we just installed, a greenhouse. I have a horticulturalist who just had to grow plants, and he cleared this kind of wild area, this vacant field, poison ivy, everything, and just started growing a bunch of seed trays. And we thought this is such a great idea that we can actually propagate some of the things that we can't find in the trade anymore. And we put a greenhouse in last month. So we're really looking to see how that can help. It won't be heated, but it'll at least give us a couple of more months around the shoulder seasons. And we do work with, we have a teen program called the Emerging Fellows Program, and they work with us for 3 years. It's about 45 teens every year. And they now have a horticulture track, and we've helped develop some programs for them. And one of my team members is a former high school science teacher. He's really into programming with these kids, and they can work with us in the summertime as interns. And it's really interesting to see the light come on when you see people really get excited about horticulture. And anybody who can work outdoors in New York in July and August, more power to them. So as I mentioned, the Highline has a lot of ecological benefits. I forgot to push play, but I'm going to check on the time. Somebody feel free to cut me off if it's time to stop. But we do a series of really important ecological work as well. And it's not like Piet was designing a biodiverse garden or a habitat garden, but because he uses so many natives and he plants so dramatically thick, and we leave everything all winter, it's a really lively place. And just to remind you, it is this ribbon that's just running through the west side. It's traffic and hardscape all around us. But we really have kind of leaned into the urban ecology message. We did do a wonderful study with the American Museum of Natural History a few years back, and they did a bee survey. And I think we discovered 33 species of bees on the Highline. We have birds that nest. And we're working actually with the New York City Bird Alliance this year, the former Audubon Society. And we're going to be doing some surveys with them and the Christmas count on the Highline this year. And here's our bees. We just did a program with the Bee Conservancy last week, working with iNaturalist and Bee Machine, which is this new bee survey app, which I urge you to check out. It's really cool. And then, of course, we have a series of butterflies. Our monarchs are really important to us. And 2 years ago, we participated in the official Wildflower of New York City project. There was an organization from each of the 5 boroughs that was asked to nominate a wildflower. New York City did not have an official wildflower. So we nominated butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa. Maybe because we have 6.5 million potential voters, we won. And Asclepias tuberosa is working its way through the city council to become the official wildflower of New York City. And then some other cool things that we see. I took that picture of the crab spider with my iPhone. And so we do really lean into our ability with 6.5 million visitors, and the Highline is kind of famous. We're really interested in being able to kind of spread the message about the things that we think are important. So this year we do a horticulture celebration every year. 2 years ago it was native plants. Last year it was Piet Oudolf that we celebrated on his 80th birthday. This year it's nature in the city. We have these great illustrators that we work with. And then we have this section of the Highline at 14th Street that goes under a building, and we get to put in these beautiful interpretive panels. And we worked all winter coming up with the language that we wanted to kind of, and then we have these signs that also appear in the garden. There's 38 of these signs that are either talking specifically about a plant or one of the processes that we do. And it's been such an important and impactful kind of nature in the city experience that I've convinced them to leave it up for 2 years so I can get a plant list up on the website this winter. So talking about Piet, he is designing some new gardens for me that you'll see in a second. But we are planning to have him back kind of every 2 years. And he is really amazing. We walk the Highline. He stops here. He's talking to Ian, who takes care of the flyover. He hears their concerns. They talk plants. We make notes. It's really amazing to have that experience because it's managing an evolution, right? The trees are getting taller. Things are always changing. The buildings are changing. And so we just constantly have to be kind of rethinking and coming up with new strategies. And Piet's always coming up with new plants. When he was here last October, I think we had about 12 new species of plants that he was suggesting that we try. And we're trying to get this established, but they're going into a really full dynamic garden, and that's a whole nother strategy. Where's Judy? See, Judy, I was there. We were talking about having the opportunity. Oh, that's a really red, interesting. We weren't that red, actually. I don't know what's going on with some of this formatting. There was a it was called Dynamic Vision, and it was a naturalistic garden conference in Germany 2 years ago. And Pete was the guest of honor, Nigel Dunnett, Noel Kingsbury, Tom Stewart Smith. I mean, it was the who's of great naturalistic garden designers. And so Yuki and I got to go. That's Yuki, my manager, and Pete just gave us a masterclass, spent all day at his garden. We went into his studio, saw the videos. He made us coffee. It was just really amazing. And we met Anya, his beautiful wife, who really is the wind beneath Pete's wings. I mean, she really kind of kept the nursery going. So when Pete was here last October, we looked at this section. This is kind of near where those little oak seedlings were. This is what it looked like. And so now all of that temporary scaffolding and everything that was up for 9 years is gone. And these gardens, I convinced Pete to do a brand new design in these two sections. It's about a block long. All the soil will get pulled out, replaced, new drip irrigation, and then kind of a new garden for this section, which I'm really excited about. And that's going in October. So then up at 34th Street, this is the very north end of the High Line, and there's an entrance here that you can kind of, well, you can't really see. The gate is kind of right here. And you can see there's a bus stop on the right, there's a parking lot on the left. And this is an entrance to the High Line. And so people who are coming to visit for the first time are walking into this. And it was never a design garden. This is not a Pete. It's kind of a self-seeded mix of a few things that we've thrown around. And since the walkway's getting replaced, because it was disintegrating, remember? I convinced Pete to do a brand new garden for us that we're going to be installing a year from now. Well, hopefully next spring, but construction in the High Line always runs late, so I know it's probably going to be next fall. And here's the design. And this was a pinch me moment as a landscape designer, getting to work with Pete as he was coming up with his plan. And he does his whole little site visit with his video camera, and he's talking in Dutch. And he said, I always talk in Dutch. I don't want the landscape architects to know what I'm thinking. Literally, there were a couple of people from field operations that are going to kind of be managing the project. And we were walking along, and they were chatting, and they were using all of that, you know, landscape architect lingo and mass and all of that. And I was dragging behind with him, and he said, you know, I let them talk, and then I do what I want. And so it's going to be a really shrubby garden because he wants it to be immersive. It's not, the beds aren't really wide. So he wants to make sure that it feels kind of thick. And as you walk in, you're kind of immersed. And so we went back and forth. You know, he's so evolved that he literally had all these new plants he wanted to use. And I was like, Pete, it needs to feel like the High Line. It needs to set up what people are going to see. So he's like, yeah, okay. And so he's so good. He's so Dutch. It's like, okay, you tell me what your criticism is. Yes, no, okay. It's very kind of straightforward. And you can get a sense of what's going on here. I think it's going to be a great bird garden because there's viburnums and mountain ash and elderberry. And so there'll just be a lot of thickets for the birds to hide in, and then a lot of food for them. And we do get quite a few migratory birds. The Hudson is a big kind of migratory area, and they'll be able to stop here for a snack on their way south. You can get a sense of the scale here. Field operations came up with these renderings. I love the little guy with the man bun. We're definitely, it's an urban garden for sure. You know, he's just come from his coffee shop in Brooklyn, and then some renderings. You can kind of see a little bit what's going on. Lots of fall color, always a peat garden. You can see the sumacs are back, and that's that. Thank you for taking that journey with me.